now I would like to introduce today's presenter, George Solis.
Thank you. Welcome to the UX Exchange for 2021. It is good to be here. It is good to have you along. One more time to those first-time attendees. Welcome. Hope to see you next year live in person. My name is George Solis. I am the principal economist and tax policy advisor at Vertex. I've been with Vertex approximately 15 years. And my job, I am an economist and tax lawyer, and my job at Vertex is literally to keep the enterprise and our clients apprised of emerging fiscal trends and trade policy trends and controversy. So for me, it's very important to pass that on to our clients and customers, as well as to their tax departments, so that they can actually begin to understand what are the emerging trends in taxation and how do they interact. So this is my first session. The next one is tomorrow in the afternoon on trade and taxation trends. So for this session, please take a look at the learning objectives very quickly. We are going to look at the global and national proposals for taxing the digital economy. Look at some of the models and standards and explore what countries are going to join a multilateral network and which one will remain in a unilateral mode once the globe proposes to agree upon a single standard. More of that to come. We're also going to take a look at, thereafter, the OECD inclusive framework for the unified approach. We're not going to go into detail on both pillars 1 and 2, but we will discuss how they affect global and national standards in direct and indirect taxation. So we're going to look at those digital tax factors. They are literally popping up and emerging all over the states here in the US, but also how the European and Latin American models may be influencing, particularly the European, some of what the states are doing here in the United States. So the whole idea is for you to plan ahead and look at what the states are doing, what proposed regulations are important for you and your department to look at, and also how do they impact you? How will they affect you? Why? Because this is only the beginning, and you should understand that. We are about to embark in a true adventure in digital taxation in the next few years, and you probably may have seen that in the television right now with some of the proposals made by the President Biden's administration. So with that in mind, we will continue. So right now, we're going to talk about the main differences and continuing court challenges that are happening in U.S. state digital taxation proposals. And particularly, let's look at the very first poll question. And the question is a true and false. States in the U.S. do not have any type of digital product of services anywhere in the country right now. Wonderful. Thank you very much for submitting your answers. True. Some U.S. states do have digital products and services, such as digital advertising and sales tax. Is that true or false? Actually, false is correct in the first one. States have current digital tax products only. At this moment, one of the main problems and challenges are that states are submitting, as you will see in a few minutes, digital advertising as part of sales tax. So in reality, digital advertising at this very moment is not allowed in the United States. So right now, the first answer, false. all U.S. states currently have digital products only. However, please listen carefully. We are asking you to select the best of all three answers. Some states have digital products, but are considering services. So we will take a look at that in the next few slides. But there is no digital advertising taxation right now, except for one state, and right now it is not yet in effect. So please, let's take a look at that. Well, let us ask the most important question: why is digital taxation coming to America, coming to the United States? And the quick and easy answer is because it's coming everywhere in reality. So the United States is not going to be left out of such a profitable and lucrative type of revenue streams for the states. So in particularly, some years ago, as you may know, in 2013 and 14, the OECD released what was called the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Initiative. It's called the BEPS Initiative, and it has 15 points and actions to that plan. BEPS 2.0, which is the unified approach under pillars 1 and 2, what they call again BEPS 2.0, it's about taxing the digital economy. So the first one to jump into this were obviously the Europeans. And let's take a look at this. First, we have to assess what is happening right now in the States. The COVID-19 has impacted every kind of state tax revenue streams. Obviously, 2 years of the distance economy has slowed the national and regional economic recovery. And we are almost out of this, but we're still in a recovery mode. We are only resuming growth as we pass the first of the stages, but we are literally still in an inflationary period. So that is actually retarding growth a little bit. And the states, nevertheless, have shown a little sturdity, a little resilience. Many states had rainy day funds. And because of e-commerce and sales tax on e-commerce, obviously had to be mainly e-commerce, as you see below, particularly because, as we know, the distance economy kept us out of stores and kept us out of restaurants and kept us out of the active economy and the real economy from day-to-day life. Nevertheless, e-commerce and other type of economic activity allowed some states to go through this relatively not unscathed, but actually with not that much of a diminished economy, thus the resilience. So what are we looking at? What we're looking at is that although these variations have maintained the performance uneven, and some states are better than off, nevertheless, especially in an inflationary period as we have it, and we'll talk a little bit about that more, what we have is that the states are looking to, if they already have it, to maintain and retain a lot of that economic resilience, or if they're slipping a bit economically, then what they're looking for is actually to how they're going to fill up their coffers and revamp their budgets for the years 22 and 23 and beyond. So why is this important? Because when you look at the state's individual tax bases, you can only go two ways. The vertical way is raising tax rates, or you can go the horizontal way, expanding the tax base. So once again, you either expand the tax base or you raise the tax rates, but you cannot do both because you become non-competitive, right? Other states will actually have greater competition. You may have seen, already heard, that as we speak, there are various competitions between states, and certain companies are leaving some states for others, and that other states are actually suffering more of that, should we say, exodus of enterprises to other states. So they have to do this in a very projected and protracted way, and which there is some balance. So when states are looking at that, they are also looking that there will be, as you see in number two, that in the post-COVID tax competition, there will be regional adjustments. So the states might now include new products and services or adjust tax rates vertically, as you can see that. I just explained that. You cannot do both, and you cannot risk your regional market share of the competitive economic race, if I may say that. This is important because the next, what I call fiscal horizon, is digital taxation. So the trick is exactly how is this going to happen? Is there going to happen more along the way of Wayfair versus South Dakota and the economic threshold of sales and use tax, and some states are doing this, or are they going to venture to copy and import some of the European models? And that's what we're going to continue to explore this morning. So when we're looking at number three, taxing the digital economy, as I am saying, the post-Wayfair effect of expanding that economic nexus is the next phase. So before, we were taxing already e-commerce. We began with also taxing marketplace providers and facilitators. And we began, this is pre-COVID, sharing and the gig economy were also being explored to tax more effectively. In some states, it was taxed to a max, but also in some, it was minimum. That is spending. And we're also spending the taxing rights of those states. But there has to be models of balance. So with that, we'll pass on. And I wanted you to see this since we've been discussing. This is directly from the 2019 to 2020 measurements on the digital economy in the United States, and particularly how it has outpaced the overall U.S. economic growth. Right now, look at this. In 2019, 9.6% of the U.S. global GDP, or $2.1 trillion, had to do with digital, literally digital nexus, I would call it, or digital nexus activity. In other words, e-commerce, sales, streaming, and other types of digital activities. So take a look at this. And this was in 2019 when we were in the first phases of the COVID era, not even into recovery yet. So imagine, I was just reading, I went back a few days ago to the BEA, and this is, as you can see what you're seeing, this is directly, you can see it on your own. I put the site there. This is the Bureau of Economic Affairs, and the BEA and the Bureau of Economic Analysis literally measure the economy and the various sectors. And so what we're beginning to see is that e-commerce is literally primarily a staple margin of GDP sustenance and growth in the United States. So I wanted you to see that, as you will see other slides and illustration, that you can see that e-commerce not only is going to be retained, but will probably also be compounded and increased in the years to come, along with regular mercantile commerce and trade. So take a look at this. In the wise digital taxation, again, it's been the same reason as adopted worldwide. And again, in the last 20 years, state sales tax have been in decline, right? They have been in decline. And why in decline? There are several factors, several reasons why they have been in decline. A lot of it has to do because of balance between sales and services, or sales, services, and digital products. And also, when you get caught up in state-to-state and regional competition, you try to maintain certain levels of taxation to attract investments and economic activity, commercial activity to your to your borders. So several states target potential revenue sources that have actually, through sales tax primarily, have actually maintained a certain amount of tax rates stabilities throughout the United States and its possessions. However, this is moving on. Current state tax rates on digital tax and products vary from 1% to 8.5%, but these will be increasing. And remember, this is without advertising and other types of more advanced digital taxation. And I mean by advanced, meaning European style models, okay? So 28 US states already apply regulations specifically dealing with different forms of digital property and goods, and you will see them in a second. And in even electronically developed goods are being now taxed more than before, right? Some of them do it in a manner like sales and use tax. We already see that many states we tax streaming, we tax uploading, educational services, different type of banking services with financial intermediaries, etc. So mostly right now are dealing with digital property, again, with download and streaming. This is about to change, and I ought to caution you right now, you will see a little bit of an adjustment here, because when you tax the Netflix and Amazons of the world and the Primes and others and Disneys, what you're doing is you are taxing the streaming services, the digital property services. The problem is that they are not paying local and municipal or state taxes in infrastructures like cable companies. You may actually refer to a few articles I've written in this last year and this year about the streaming tax competition in infrastructure. So a lot of cable companies saying the only way you can do this is through cable, but yet you're not paying your municipal infrastructure or state infrastructure taxes. So we do see, I did an article together with Forbes in which we looked how myself and other colleagues from the industry, we see an eventual confrontation between the streaming type services, again, the Prime Videos, the Netflix, the Disneys, etc., and the cable companies asking for their shares. So you may see even emerging surtaxes in that manner. And taxes do not necessarily have to be taxes per se, levies. They could also be some sort of added fees. And sometimes the question becomes whether a fee is a tax in your jurisdiction. So we'll explore that as we move. So states are now seeking more guidance on how to treat uniformly digital taxes, right? And recently, they've been seeking that guidance. This is where we are today, very important. They've been seeking that guidance with a bit of caution, because they don't want to literally signal and telegraph ahead what they are going to propose, but they've been seeking guidance from the Multi-State Tax Commission, and they've been seeking guidance also from COST, the Council on State Taxation. So if you go to either one of the websites, you're going to see how they are advising the states to approach digital taxation in the United States in a uniform manner. However, what they do want to see is that nevertheless, digital taxation remains, when it comes to sales and an economic nexus, it remains in the hands of the states. They probably, if you go to the National Conference of State Legislature, the NCSL, you will see that they are actually against the federal government intervening in this taxing domain. So let's take a look at this, because I told you that we would discuss this more. The problematic part is not that states tax digital trends or that they tax digital services and products, so long as they do it with an appropriate confine in commerce and do not go beyond. So as you can see, presently, about 30 states already add sales and use tax, in some cases, use tax as well, to some form of digital goods and services. Okay, this is a great opportunity because for those states who already have that, they can actually now they have already included it in the tax base, and they can actually now either increase on the vertical side the rates on certain digital products and services. The problem comes when states become opportunistic and want to do, as I said before, both increase more digital transactions with a wider range of digital goods and services, as you see on the first bullet, and on top of that, increase a little bit more on the rate side. Why? Because of economic need in the post-COVID era. And I know what you're probably thinking. Many of you, particularly the tax executives and analysts, are saying, but wait a second, the federal government provided for the states under the American Recovery Plan, ARPA, and the states, and also in monetary relief from the Main Street relief program by the Federal Reserve. They should have money in hand. They do. They have cash, but they're not looking now. They're looking at post-COVID, how to recover some of that, and then continue growth from there. Economically speaking and fiscally speaking in taxes, you can only, when you are recovering, you have to then start planning for growth. And you can only do that with increased revenue, right? So to date, Connecticut, Indiana, Nebraska, New York, Oregon, and Washington are proposing taxes on the revenue of digital ads, sales of personal data, and other activities, including your participation in social media company. And of course, lately you have heard that some of these social media companies are in a little bit of trouble, particularly because they're saying that to increase that kind of traffic and obviously because of all the regulations being imposed upon them right now, they are allowing a more, should we say, open social media platform, including participation. We're not going to do there. But if you start taxing that, what is going to be the impact for states' revenue? Well, let's take a look. In Connecticut, we are looking at the proposals of social media providers' annual gross revenue resulting from advertising services. And please, I beg you to keep this in mind. Keep thinking about advertising. Remember, even the first polling question we were talking about, there is digital taxes already, and not yet in digital advertising. And these are proposals. In Indiana, they also have advertising services as well as social media provider services. In Nebraska, they've introduced expanding the state's sales tax to include digital advertising. New York, you see it there. West Virginia. In Oregon, we are looking in gross receipts on the privileges of engaging on the business of selling taxable personal information in retail location. And of course, in Washington, we have a variation of that extends to business, the B&O, business and occupation taxes, to every person engaging within the state in the business of making sales and personal data. Now, let's watch these trends for a second. So long as the digital taxes, whether, again, rate or expanding the base, is being done within comprising sales and use tax in the traditional manner through, let's say, the economic nexus and economic threshold provided by the proscription in South Dakota versus Wayfair, and also for marketplace facilitators along the same lines with some variations. That is perfectly acceptable and has been, as you can see, many states already have it, 30 of them. The problem comes when digital advertising is included, and we'll go to that right now. I wanted you to see that so that you can see what we're discussing. Right now in the United States, there are 3 currently proposed models for U.S. state digital service taxes. As I just said, the first one on top is the one within traditional Wayfair methods, right? Sales and use tax. On the left, you have the marketplace facilitator sales and use tax methods. So they are allowing third-party vendors, marketplace facilitators and providers to actually literally collect some of those digital taxes. The problematic one is to the lower right? The gross receipt taxes on digital advertising, which is actually an European import, the EU style. So right now, others may be emerging. States, I don't want to say some states may be desperate, some may not, but everyone is looking for retrenchment to grow more in the post-COVID era. This is a defining moment, both fiscally and economically, for us, and particularly for corporations around the world, because this will tell us what is that new, what I call fiscal frontier of emerging taxes. Something that you should have already been looking is that there will be more gross receipt taxation. Many states already have them. New Mexico, Oregon, other have mixed or also hybrid sales and gross receipt. So what we want to keep an eye out is in that variety, and whether that variety is legal, and whether, and you will see what I mean by that, there are no constitutional challenges, or whether that variety will move us forward in state revenues. Okay, so we finally arrived. As you know, in 2021, Maryland passed the United States' first digital advertising tax, right? On February 12th this year, it enacted the digital advertising gross revenue tax, which is a digital service tax. And what it does, as you can see that on the bullet, it literally taxes digital advertising applicable to certain years between December 31st, 2020, beginning thereafter, and it imposes a tax on the annual gross revenue of company derived from digital advertising in Maryland. It sounds interesting, right? Because it says in Maryland, but in reality, it is not. We'll take a look at that in the third bullet. What is a digital advertising services? Advertising services on digital interface, including advertisement in the forms of banner advertising, search engine advertising, interstitial advertising, meaning those that appear in services including, let's say, in YouTube, which we've seen more of that lately, and also within certain, you can see them not only in banners, but you can see it sometimes in between, let's say, educational services or streaming and other comparable advertising services, right? Now, this is a gross receipt revenue tax, but on the other hand, it is a portion similar to state income taxes, except in and within literally a gross receipt regime framework. The annual gross revenue from advertising services in Maryland are calculated by using the apportionment fraction of Maryland over everywhere. So the annual gross revenue are derived from digital advertising everywhere in the United States. Now, this presents, as we speak, you will see it again, an administrative problem. And the reason why you have an administrative problem is because although they did amend the bill to show that they are administratively capable of measuring that kind of digital advertising services participation, the community, the technical community, or I should say the big tech community, they don't know exactly how this is going to be done. So it imposes incremental rates from 2.5%, as you can see, to literally a global annual revenue of 100 million through 1 billion to 10% in a gross revenue exceeding 15 billion. This is a lot. And one of the problems that is taking them to the challenge that we will discuss in a few minutes is that formulary apportionment. It is not explicit enough for us or anyone else to look at how they are literally treating this in and outbound distribution in the apportionment fraction. For example, how does a digital advertising occurring in Maryland but is being used in someone in Pennsylvania or in Washington State or in Iowa? Or how about a moving person, a person that goes from Northern Maryland into Southern Pennsylvania? So where do you tax that person? And right now, this is not that transparent. It's not that visible. So as we speak, Senate Bill 787, has been suspended. It's been held in abeyance. It is still active and it's passed, but it has been suspended because of two things. Number one, they're working out the details. The governor and the Senate agreed to suspend it for now. So it's been passed, it's effective, but it's suspended. And they literally said that they would delay it for one more year. They're working out these apportionment details, and they're working out, of course, all the controversies that are accompanying this digital advertising. And here it is. The Maryland digital tax legislation in 2021, as you can see, there are two cases, and there is another one that came out after this. You can see that there is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce versus the Maryland Comptroller Franchot. It's a federal case filed in February 21 by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce together with the Internet Association and other large company groups. And then there's another one, state, called Comcast and Verizon versus, again, the Maryland Comptroller Franchot in April 21. These two are still pending. They're still ongoing lawsuits. You will see what is being discussed, okay? However, recently, both parties, the state of Maryland, moved to dismiss the suit, and it was denied. And also, in both lawsuits, the state and federal, the parties literally moved to dismiss the state of Maryland's answers, and it was actually denied. My hallucination, the best guess I am doing upon the courts, is dangerous to do, is actually that they are looking if constitutionally they can accommodate this tax. Whether or not it's coming, I think is here. And I think eventually we will have digital taxes in the United States. What we do not yet know, what form will it take? Will it remain a sales and use tax type of economic threshold under a Wayfair prescription, or will it be more of a digital advertising tax like they have in France and other European countries? And I should add at this point that the Maryland digital tax is an import, almost alike to the French-style unilateral digital service tax. And by unilateral, I mean French national. I don't mean EU or OECD. It's the French national digital service tax. And what Maryland did was actually take that model and adjust it for their state. And I will tell you, before we go on, that that is not going to work. Two main reasons. Number one, most European countries that are civil law work in what is called unitary legal systems and constitutional system. The United States is a federal state system, and we're not a civil law, we are a common law. And therefore, because of our federal state constitutional restrictions, we have limitations. And one of them is digital advertising, which is considered commercial speech under the First Amendment. And here it is, as you can see. I urge you to download and study, if I may say so, and study the slides so that you can see the arguments in both the federal suit on the left and the Comcast Verizon on the right. Because if you notice, literally, they are both, of course, challenging the same legislation. But look at the causes of action. They're both based on constitutional legal challenges. And what I want to caution you is that the federal one is actually based on the Internet Tax Freedom Act and is subsequent Obama-approved Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act, or PITFA. It also violates the Commerce Clause because exactly of that competitive, it's called the Darman-Common Clause, because of that competitive and discriminative prices on the apportionment between states and discriminate rates. How can you literally tax a company advertising within your state digitally in another state? So that violates also the Commerce Clause and the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. However, if you look at the right-hand side, the constitutional legal challenges within Maryland constitutional system, it's actually even broader, right? They also violate the U.S. Supremacy Clause and the Internet Freedom Act, again, because of the federal constitution. The Supremacy Clause also of the Maryland Constitution, so you see U.S. and Maryland. Also, the Due Process Clause, federal, the Due Process Clause, Maryland. But please listen carefully when it comes to the violation of the Commerce Clause. Is discriminatory tax and unfair apportionment, which is what we've been discussing. So I hope you have time to look at this, and then if you can, try to keep up. Why is this important? Why is this case so seminal? This case is seminal because if this becomes the predominant model that New York is looking at, that Connecticut is looking at, and this works, they are just standing on the sideline, waiting to see what happens in Maryland. And if the federal courts can carve exceptions to the Internet Tax Freedom Act, or the courts can, which I don't know if they will be able to do that without the advice of Congress or contribution of Congress legislatively in some way, but of the Commerce Clause and interpret the Due Process Clause accordingly. So unless something is done, then it's going to be hard for us to keep away the European-style digital taxations of advertising within the United States. It's extremely obviously lucrative, and we already know that. So here we go. So here it is, as I said, there had been already motion to dismiss, and particularly some of the critics that supported the Friends of the Court or amicus briefs call it impossibility. They say that this is administratively impossible to do it the way the apportionment does it. And if they do it, again, it will be a discriminative tax, thus in violation of the Commerce Clause. So you see it here. Generally, a gross revenue tax on digital advertising levies a tax on the total online advertising revenue of large multinational corporations, Alphabet / Google, Amazon, Facebook, and many others that have large presence in digital advertising. So again, e-commerce retails continue to increase exponentially due to the personal distance economy, and they will rise faster in the post-COVID world. And marketplace facilitators and remote seller collections are also multiplying. So why am I interjecting this at this point? Because imagine if on top of this, services, goods and services, we also have social media, digital advertising, and that kind of widening of the tax base. So companies are looking at a tremendous amount of, should we say, incremental but increased taxation in the years to come. And of course, the states, as I already explained on the onset, are looking for that type of revenue increase. So as I mentioned before, please take a look, because this is another controversy waiting to happen. Streaming, as I mentioned, and other digital services will eventually collide with cable companies over infrastructures, tax payments to those municipalities, because they do not have to pay for those contributing factors. Again, cables undergrounds, post, and so many other type of municipal levies that are placed upon cable companies. So at this point, we come to our second poll question. From a U.S. legal perspective, a digital tax on advertising may be challenged because digital taxation is not permitted anywhere in the U.S. U.S. may not tax digital ads because it is a breach of privacy and unethical, or most digital service taxes, including digital advertising, may not be legal or constitutional in the United States. So please select your answer.
Let's just give it another few seconds here for a few more attendees to submit. And I think we should be good at this point, George, to see the results.
Thank you. And number 3, of course, you all got it correct, 80.5. This is very refreshing for me to see that, because it is very hard, particularly inbound, let's say marketplace facilitators for Europe, to understand this, or US-based companies to understand that there is a greater view. And remember, not only because it can be used as the future model, but also because if we start going down the path of breaching commercial speech as guaranteed in the First Amendment, what other constitutional protection based on taxation may perhaps be in jeopardy in the future. And always, when you look at economics and fiscal policy, there has to be a balance, right? Taxation not only has to be balanced, but taxation with a competition and fair competition with industries and enterprises is a must in our country, as it is even, of course, in the European Union. So now that we discussed the U.S. trends of digital services tax and the potential challenges, or I should say the actual challenges and the potential results, as well as the rise in streaming and gross receipts tax, let's take a look at what the OECD and the international digital taxation is moving. And what is the U.S. on the unified approach on global taxation and taxing rights? So let's get into this right now. I know we have a little bit of time, but actually this is a bit easier. And that is because everyone has been paying attention to President Biden's administration on the global minimum tax, which is actually part of both Pillar 1 and also Pillar 2, when, as you can see there, multinationals pay a minimum level of global tax. So instead of having, up to now, unilaterally, meaning nations have been literally drafting and enacting their own national digital taxation. Right now, we have approximately, I believe it's 37 or 38 around the world, both in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The problem that we have with these different models is, of course, they all include in Europe digital advertising. As I already mentioned, they do not have the same kind of constitutional constraints there are in the United States. But that leaves economies out of the entire risk perspective. The more national unilateral systems you have, the more risk abound for international companies, for multinationals. So as you can see here, under Pillar 1, which is called the inclusive framework because it supposedly include the majority of nations in the world. Right now, as far as number 3, Pillar 2 is concerned, you probably heard recently that 136 of 140 countries have already agreed to a 15% minimum global tax. This was only an agreement to agree. And what I mean by that, of course, is that it has to be followed by a treaty, a convention. We'll talk more in a little bit of time. But right now, when we look at this, that under Pillar 1, we see that the OECD under the Pillar 1 and 2 approaches are looking at permanent establishment is being expanded. Before, like in the US States, it used to be physical. Now is virtual and economic nexus. That means that because of that, there is an expansion of taxing rights to every jurisdiction. And so what companies earn and spend and the sales they make in those jurisdictions have to be paid and should remain in those jurisdictions. This is known the attribution of profits doctrine, okay, or the attribution of profits to jurisdiction, because the value, economic value created is in those home countries. And until now, as you remember, throughout the last nearly 20, actually I would go as far as saying 50 years, more and more of those profits have been either repatriated or fleeing the jurisdiction or being minimized through different, let's say through the work of tax havens or financial centers, or actually through adjustments of different types of mismatch, hybrid mismatch entities in different jurisdictions. And this is all about to come to an end. But one of the problems that we are posing today is that we have competing convention. And that is that the OECD is the main multinational convention trying to universalize and unite global digital taxation, uniformed, not harmonized, but uniformed. At the same moment, you have the UN Model Tax Convention that also tries to uniform under Article 12B automated services and digital taxation. Now, the UN model does not necessarily compete with the OECD. They are somewhat, and to the great and by and large, great part, they are complementary. It follows the OECD convention. The only problem that you see between these two competing global digital tax regimes is that under the OECD unified approach, it is global, but it is called inclusive, but it's actually created by the most economically developed countries in the world, the US, France, the European Union, and of course, China is not a part of the OECD, but it is part of the inclusive framework. Japan is part of the OECD, Korea, et cetera, et cetera. So the problem that comes is that the UN model tries to protect more developing countries and underdeveloped nations to make sure that they are beneficiaries of these global frameworks. I'm choosing my words carefully because under Pillar 1, take a look at the international transfer pricing rules. This is all based on transfer pricing or intercompany transfers, residual profits for digital and consumer-facing business with the aim of taxing companies in the jurisdiction, as I said earlier, where the revenue is sourced and located and the value is created. So I would like you to remember these code terms. And again, given the varied composition of attendees, remember that everything now has to do with taxing rights, economic nexus, value creation, and the attribution of profits where those sales are made to that jurisdiction. And that is different. However, that will do away with unilateral systems. 4 days ago, a group of 6 major countries, United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain, and others, agreed that they would let go, some of the ones that you see mentioned there on number 5A, agreed that they will suspend their unilateral digital tax regimes or schemes. The problem is that there are 6 out of 136. So what we need to see in order to move to a global convention, to a treaty, is in fact that more countries, they don't have to have unanimous consent or unanimous participation, is by majority, but we need to see more countries being participants. And if not only the G20, which are the major economies, but also the majority of nations in the inclusive framework goes along with it, then we can minimize risk around the world for multinationals and indeed for trade. But more importantly, we can get lessen risk factors, right? There's risk mitigation, the beta factor or risk factor decreases, and actually this would be better for the entire world. Now remember that there are 2 parts to this. Pillar 1, dealing with attribution of profits, taxing rights, economic nexus, and then Pillar 2, which has to do with minimum global taxation, known also as GLOBE. In the United States, you have heard it under the TCJA called BEAT, and soon it's going to be called SHIELD, that also addresses inversions and repatriations. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you have to put this in perspective. In today's world, what affects us globally affects us locally. And therefore, in the United States, the minute digital taxation globally becomes a reality, the states will feel more comfortable in broadening those tax bases with digital taxation, and if permitted by the courts, then allowed to do digital advertising, which of course that may not happen. Now, of course, if other nations keep more unilateral, and many nations are still not within the global agreement, meaning they don't want to bring down their national regimes or unilateral regimes, then that means that there will be less risk if there is a global agreement, but there will still be risk out there because many nations have not assented. So the real question is, are we really going to have this dichotomy of a global system by majority and a minimal of unilateral system? And how does that affect the impact of trade? Because the United States will literally say that digital service taxes are discriminate to U.S. commerce and trade. And as you know, the United States have now agreed trade tariffs to most of these countries who had unilateral systems. So if we agreed by this, then of course we will be better off. But then the states will definitely know that it is okay for them to have digital taxation within a constitutional permitted purview as well, if they do it within the Wayfair economic nexus prescriptions. So here's more. I believe we're out of time. Am I correct, Kyle?
Yes, we are getting close to the end of the hour here.
Very good. Thank you. So again, let's take a look at this. Within the inclusive framework, and many countries, by the way, um, I should be frank to say that a lot of developing countries do not consider this to be a very inclusive. Why? Because please remember that developing countries do not have developed giant techs. Most of those countries exist in the United States, Europe, and of course in Asia, Korea, China, and other major economies. So how do very small countries and developing economies actually be beneficiary of a global agreement that benefit mostly capital exporting, not importing, capital exporting investment countries that actually have control of the digital economy? So that is indeed a preoccupation of the tax authorities around the world. So is it really inclusive?
I just want to jump in
Yes?
real quick. Can we go to the third polling question for CPE credits? Can we just skip to that real quick so we can get that
Yes,
credit in?
indeed. That's right. Excuse me. So I wanted to finish in that note in number 5, because you have to question whether really it is inclusive, or whether really in this developing stage is it a unified system as we discussed. Here is the Made in America global minimum tax proposal, and here is the OECD inclusive framework. Under the unified approach of Pillar 1 and 2 was intended to do what? Make global minimum tax and trade rules uniform, address the challenges of the digital economy, or create an international agreement on eliminating double taxation mainly. So what was the inclusive framework under the unified approach intended to do? Please select your choice.
Let's give it another few seconds here.
Yes, thank you.
All right, everybody looking for CPE credits, if you could just submit now, I'll give it another 5 seconds. And we should be good to move on to the next slide.
Thank you. Number 1 says, make the global minimum tax and trade rules uniform. 48.5% of you said that that was the correct answer. The next is address the challenges of the digital economy. 25.7% said. And create an international agreement on eliminating double taxation. And actually, believe it or not, number 2 is correct. Address the tax challenges of the digital economy. Number 1, again, that's the best answer. But number 1 is also correct from the point of view that it will create under Pillar 2 a global minimum tax. But in reality, remember, we're not asking you to choose one correct answer. It's the best of all 3. So in reality, the unified approach was created to address the concerns of the digital economy. So number 2 is correct, or the best answer. Number 1 is the second best answer. And number 3 should be considered also, in the sense that it may relieve double taxation for a certain amount. And now, please, let us conclude. Thank you. Here's your summary that we've discussed. As I said, several states proposed enacted digital tax regulation, importing European legislations and models, and this is not a good idea, right? Until a few days ago, 9 countries, major economies, both in Europe and Latin America, proposed and implemented taxes to digital services, including the EU, was to implement its all taxes. But again, as of recently, all that has been delayed pending the result of the next November meeting of the OECD and the EU. So right now, once again, don't forget, it's not a done deal yet. It has been endorsed, it's been agreed to move on, but we will need a international agreement, a multinational convention, and a lot of work remains to be done. It is here that the United States already dropped certain objections, like ring fencing only American firms, that this is mainly developed, or which I would say was originally drafted to address the big, as I said, the alphabet soups and the big American techs and other multinational companies. But much work remains to be done. And another work to be done is that since it targeted U.S.-based tech, will the U.S. Senate ratify that treaty? And what I'm not going to comment on the politics, but I will tell you is consider the political landscape in the U.S. Senate today that has to ratify tax treaties, right? So what I'm saying to you that all treaties in the United States have to be ratified by the Senate. So will this be done by ratification? There is even a proposal from the Ways and Means Committee and also the Senate Finance Committee. There are proposals in case the main proposal may fail, but we have to consider whether this may or may not be possible under the current ambience here in the United States. So now, questions, please.
All right. There's one that I will go to. As an advertising agency purchasing advertising services on behalf of our clients and passing through the charges and then charging a fee for the service, do you feel the fee for the service is applicable for the Maryland advertising tax?
That's an excellent question. On a subsequent bill in the Senate in Maryland, you should know that in the Maryland bill, it actually forbids company from passing on that digital advertising gross receipt tax onto consumers. It literally expressly says that. Now, whether or not as a fee passing on outside of Maryland through an advertising agency. And by the way, if you're in Maryland advertising agency, this is where the discrimination under the Common Clause may also be considered, may come in. And that is because they have exempted a lot of Maryland advertising agencies and Maryland companies. So can you imagine what that will do if you attract more of those into Maryland just to make sure that you're not charged in Maryland, or that you can avoid or circumvent or work around a lot of that gross receipt taxation. So again, that's not only discriminatory to others, but also you are attracting and exempting at the same time from the Maryland. So that is one of the points that still work to be seen. What is the treatment not only to Maryland advertising versus other states' advertising agents, and what is the treatment for companies in Maryland doing the advertising as banners, interstitial, etc., versus other companies doing. And that's not the detail we have yet. And that, as you noticed on the state challenge, that is one of the problems. So my question to you is, it will depend as how the bill reads. If you are a Maryland company, as the bill reads right now, you may actually be exempted from some of these advertising. If you're not, what part of your business that you pass on to your consumer, if permitted by the Senate Bill 787, will actually tax some or more, since it's a gross receipt of your activities within Maryland. I trust under the circumstances, I answered your question.
All right, George, that's all that we have for questions for today. So, any concluding statements?
Yes, actually, that is an excellent question. And that's the kind of question that the rest of the attendees should be looking at. They should be looking is, are you, how much activity do you have in Maryland? How much activity you have without outside of the United States? And also start considering whether or not in your state there are similar proposals. New York, Connecticut, Nebraska. Will you be more on the sales and use side and Wayfair or marketplace facilitator side, or will you be more on the Maryland and Connecticut and New York proposals of digital advertising, and whether or not, what would be the treatment to your commercial internet commercial activities under both federal and state law? And with that, I say thank you very much.